I always believed that the past had already taken everything it possibly could from me. I thought I had already survived the worst of life, being abandoned as a child, shuffled through foster homes, told over and over that I wasn't wanted. I believed that one day I would finally get to live in peace, free from the shadows that used to follow me. But the truth is, the past doesn't always stay where we leave it. Sometimes it finds its way back. Sometimes it knocks at your door with a legal notice in hand and a name you haven't spoken out loud in 20 years. That's what happened to me. The people who left me in foster care with nothing are now trying to take something from me. And what they're after isn't just money. It's the life I built without them. Growing up, I never once called anyone mom or dad. I knew I had biological parents because of a few crumpled documents and the stories whispered to me by caseworkers. But they were never real to me. They were just names on paper. Strangers who brought me into this world and then walked away. I was placed in the foster system when I was barely old enough to talk. The earliest memories I have are of waiting rooms, shared rooms, closed doors, and adults who smiled because they were supposed to. I got used to not being chosen. I got used to being temporary. But even in that kind of world, there are rare lights. For me, that light was the Harris family. They weren't perfect. They didn't have much. And they didn't know how to say, "I love you" in the way movies show. But they showed it in other ways. In warm food, in asking how my day was, in remembering my birthday even when I didn't. They didn't officially adopt me. I stayed in the system technically, but they gave me something that mattered more than a last name. They gave me a sense of belonging. And that was enough for a long time. When I turned 18, I aged out of the system. I stayed close to the Harris family because they were the closest thing I had. They treated me like one of theirs. When Mr. Harris passed away years later, he left me the house. Not because of blood, but because of years of shared dinners, late-night talks, and quiet understanding. It was like he was saying, "You deserve somewhere to belong." I spent years fixing the place up, turning the old walls into something warm, something mine. Finally, I felt like I had a home. Finally, I felt like life had given me something back. And that's when I got the letter. At first I thought it was a scam. Something about it just felt unreal, like a joke someone with a dark sense of humor would play. But then I saw the names. The names I hadn't seen in 2 decades. My biological parents. They were taking me to court. After abandoning me, ignoring every chance to contact me, and pretending I didn't exist, they suddenly wanted something from me. Not a relationship. Not reconciliation. They wanted the house. The house I earned. The house I worked for. The house that was given to me out of love, not blood. I remember sitting at my small kitchen table, staring at that letter. My hands were shaking, but my heart was strangely still. I kept reading the same sentence. "We have a right to assets as the biological parents." They used the word parents. Like it meant something. Like they had the right to use it. I spent nights awake wondering why now. Was it money? Was it guilt? Was it something deeper? I didn't have answers, just emotions I thought I had buried. Fear, anger, confusion. And underneath it all, this quiet question that made me feel small again. Why wasn't I enough 20 years ago? I asked around. I found out they hadn't struggled the way I once imagined. I always pictured them as young, scared, unable to raise a child, lost to circumstance. But no, they had lives, jobs, a home, other kids, kids they kept, kids they raised, kids who called them mom and dad while I was learning how to fold my clothes in group homes and being told to be grateful for hand-me-downs. I wasn't abandoned because life forced them to do it. I was abandoned because they chose to. But now they see me differently. Not as the child they left, but as an adult they think they can take from. Someone who finally built something stable. They didn't want me, but they want what I have. I used to dream that maybe one day I'd meet them again. Not to forgive. Not even to reconnect. Just to ask them why. Why me? Why leave? Why forget? But I never imagined that when we finally stood in the same room again, it would be in a courtroom. With lawyers. With papers. With a judge deciding the value of a life lived without parents. I keep thinking about how life can be cruel in quiet ways. How the things we survive don't always stay survived. How sometimes the people who hurt us the most feel entitled to return like they never left. And the worst part? They are confident they will win. They believe the law is on their side. That blood is enough. That DNA is stronger than loyalty, love, pain, memory, or history. But they don't know my story. They don't know what I've gone through. They don't know who I became without them. And when the day came to walk into that courtroom, something happened that none of us expected. Something that changed everything. And that's where I'll start. I used to think that memories fade over time like ink left out in the sun. But some memories don't fade. Some stay sharp like glass. The night I was taken into foster care was one of those memories. I couldn't have been more than 3 years old, maybe 4. I don't remember faces clearly, just voices and the weight of confusion. I remember being carried out of a small living room, clutching a worn teddy bear, while 2 adults argued in the background. They were my biological parents. At least that's what the papers said. I don't remember them the way a child is supposed to remember parents. No warmth, no bedtime stories, no sense of safety. Just noise. And then silence. Foster care wasn't a single place for me. It was many houses, many rules, many new faces I tried to memorize only to lose again. Some homes were kind. Others were just places to sleep. You learn to travel light when your whole life fits in a garbage bag handed to you by a social worker. You learn not to get too attached to anyone. Because nothing stayed. People always change their minds. By the time I turned 16, I stopped hoping to be adopted. I aged into independence before I ever got the chance to depend on anyone. I worked part-time jobs, studied when I could, tried to build a version of myself that wasn't just the kid who got left behind. But every so often, especially at night, I wondered why. Why they let me go. Why they didn't come back. Why I wasn't enough. I thought I had left the past behind me when I turned 18. I moved out, got my own place. A tiny room with peeling paint, but it was mine. I learned to cook cheap meals, I learned how to budget, and I learned how lonely freedom can feel when you never had a home to begin with. Still, I built a life slowly, brick by brick. I went to community college. I worked more jobs. I found people who felt like friends, though I always kept a small part of myself hidden. A part one didn't want anyone to see. The abandoned part. Fast forward to now. 20 years later. I'm 23. I have a steady job. Not glamorous but stable. I have routines. I have a version of peace. I thought my story with them was over. I thought the past was something I had survived. Until the letter came. The envelope was too official to ignore. My hands were shaking before I even opened it. I didn't know why. I didn't know who would contact me through something so formal. But the minute I saw the words legal notice and biological parents, my chest tightened. They were alive. They knew where I was. And they wanted something. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of apology. Maybe they wanted to reconnect. Maybe they had changed. I let myself hold on to that idea for a moment, just one moment, long enough for my heart to flutter with something that almost felt like hope. Almost. But no, this wasn't that. The letter said they were filing a legal claim against me. Against me. Not to explain, not to reconcile, not to ask. To demand. I didn't even understand at first. I read the same lines over and over, trying to make them make sense. It felt like some kind of cruel joke. I hadn't heard their voices in 20 years. I didn't even know them. And suddenly, they were using the law to come into my life like I owed them something. I remember sitting there in my small kitchen, the letter on the table, my hands still cold. I felt anger. Confusion. But mostly disbelief. It didn't feel real. For days I didn't tell anyone. I went to work, I came home, I tried to sleep. But the past I thought I buried was now sitting at the end of my bed every night, staring at me. I finally reached out to the only person I trusted enough to share this with. Someone who knew pieces of my story but not all of it. A friend who had seen me cry when I didn't know how to ask for help. They listened carefully, not interrupting me once, and when I finished they just sat there quietly for a minute. That quiet meant more than any words. We decided I needed to see what the specifics of the claim were. I needed to understand what they wanted and why now, after all this time. So I made an appointment to speak to someone who could explain the legal language that felt like another world to me. But while I waited for that meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about them. The 2 people who brought me into the world and then left me behind. What kind of people come back after 2 decades? And what kind of people come back demanding something? I tried to recall anything about them. A smell. A laugh. A voice. Nothing came clearly. The memories were too far away, too blurred. It was like reaching through fog for something that had never been solid to begin with. But then there were the emotional memories. The ones that don't fade. The feeling of being unwanted. The feeling of being left out. The feeling of being last. Those came back instantly. As the days went by, I started to look into their lives. Not because I cared, but because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I learned things I didn't expect. They weren't struggling. They weren't homeless. They weren't ill or desperate. They were living what looked like ordinary, comfortable lives. The kind of life I had to fight for alone. That made everything even harder to understand. If they were okay all this time, why didn't they come back? Why didn't they look for me? Why now? And the deeper I searched, the more uneasy I felt. There were details that didn't add up. Financial choices. Sudden career changes. A few things that seemed too convenient. It felt like I was looking at a picture that had been edited, retouched to hide something. There was something they didn't want seen. And I had a feeling I was about to find out what it was. I could feel the tension building, like a storm quietly moving closer. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't small. And it wasn't something I was ready for. Not yet. But the past doesn't ask if you're ready. It just knocks. And this time, it came with lawyers. If you'd like, I can now continue into the next section, deepening the tension or moving toward the reveal of what they are taking you to court for. Just tell me. Do you want the twist to be? They want custody of something valuable, like a sibling or inheritance. They are claiming you owe them money. They want rights over something you unexpectedly gained, like land or property. Or do you already have a twist planned? The day of the meeting with the lawyer came faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before. I kept replaying the same questions in my head like a song stuck on loop. What could they possibly want? Why now? What changed after 20 years? I tried to calm myself, telling my heart to slow down, but my body didn't listen. The office was small but tidy. Soft lighting, shelves of books, a plant in the corner that looked a little tired but still alive. The lawyer was kind, patient, and spoke in a calm tone that made everything feel slightly less frightening. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, carefully. I studied his face, trying to read him, trying to understand the words he hadn't spoken yet. After a moment, he exhaled, which made my stomach drop. He explained the claim in simple terms. And while I won't repeat every detail here, the summary was enough to leave me frozen. My biological parents weren't just trying to contact me. They wanted something that legally tied our lives together again. Something they believed they were owed. Something they had no right to demand. My first reaction was disbelief. Then anger rose like heat under my skin. All those nights I stayed awake asking why they didn't want me. All those birthdays where I pretended it didn't bother me that no one called. Suddenly those memories came flooding back like they had been waiting for this moment. The injustice of it all made my chest heavy. The lawyer watched me carefully. He asked if I wanted to fight it legally. And of course I did. But the problem was that I didn't have the money for a long legal battle. Fighting them would cost more than I had ever had in my life. They knew that. And somehow that was the most painful part. They weren't just coming back into my life, they were coming back with power. Over the next few weeks, everything in my life slowly shifted. Work didn't feel the same. I'd catch myself staring at my phone, waiting for news or updates or clarity, but at the same time I didn't want to know anything. My routines felt disrupted. Sleep slipped away again. It felt like I was living with a shadow following me everywhere. I started looking deeper into their lives. Not out of curiosity anymore, but out of necessity. I needed to understand the people I was up against. I found pictures of them online, smiling at cookouts, standing in front of decorated living rooms at holidays, sitting with people who looked like family. Like they had a life filled with warmth and belonging. A life I never got to have. Seeing those images stung more than I expected. I thought I was past needing that kind of love, past wanting a family. But something inside me cracked. There was a little version of me still waiting for someone to choose me, to come back for me. Realizing they had simply moved on without me, that was a wound that felt fresh even after all these years. Meanwhile, my friend kept checking in on me. They tried to help me stay grounded, reminding me I wasn't alone now. They even suggested therapy, something I had always brushed off before. But suddenly it didn't seem so strange. Maybe I needed a place to talk, to untangle everything I had been carrying for so long. I also started having memories return slowly, small ones almost like flashes. The sound of a door slamming. Someone shouting. A kitchen with plates piled in the sink. Me sitting in a corner clutching a toy that's long gone now. I didn't know if these memories were real or just my mind trying to make sense of things. But they felt real enough to hurt. The deeper I looked, the more I realized something else. My biological parents were hiding parts of their past. There were gaps in their timelines. Sudden address changes. Job changes that didn't make sense. Relationships that started and ended without explanation. It was like they were always running from something. And now they were running back to me. Around this time, I met with someone who had known them years ago. Not close but enough to remember. They told me something unexpected. Something that made everything inside me go still. They said my parents had always struggled. With responsibility, with decisions, with keeping their lives stable. They said I didn't end up in foster care by accident. They said there were reasons. But when I asked what those reasons were, their voice hesitated. Their eyes softened. And they simply said, "Some things you'll learn when you're ready. But I am tired of waiting." The conflict didn't just exist in the court papers. It started living inside me. I felt torn between two realities, the life I built myself and the life I never got to have. The version of me who grew strong on my own, and the child inside who was still hurting. And then there was something else. Something unexpected. As I learned more about my biological parents, I also learned about someone else connected to them. Someone I didn't know existed. Someone who might be pulled into this whether I wanted it or not. Someone who could change everything. I wasn't prepared for that. And I wasn't sure I was ready to confront it. But the conflict was no longer just between me and them. It was spreading, pulling in new threads, new people, new truths. The more I tried to understand, the more complicated everything became. What I once thought was a simple abandonment was unfolding into something deeper. Something that didn't just change who they were. It was starting to change who I believed I was. And I could feel it. The story wasn't even close to the real beginning yet. The name showed up almost by accident. It was buried in a document I never would have seen if I hadn't asked for every record tied to my case. A single line, a date, and a name I did not recognize. At first, I thought it was just another person in the system. But something about it stayed with me. I searched it, and when their picture appeared, the world around me seemed to stop moving. They looked like me. Not exactly. Not a mirror. But the resemblance was there in small ways. The eyes, the curve of the smile, something about the way they stood that felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. The profile said they were 19. Which meant they were born after I was taken away. Which meant my biological parents had another child. A child they kept. My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to cry or scream or laugh at the unfairness. They had another chance at parenthood. They got to learn. Grow. Try again. And that time, they stayed. I didn't know what kind of person this sibling was. I didn't know their story. I didn't know if they even knew I existed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they were part of the reason my parents came back now. My friend asked me if I was going to try and contact them. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to understand why they got the family I never did. But I was also afraid. Afraid of what they might think. Afraid they had been told a story about me. Afraid they would look at me like a stranger. For days I sat with the idea. I imagined every possible version of the conversation. I imagined them being kind. I imagined them being cruel. I imagined them looking at me with confusion or pity or something worse, nothing at all. But the not knowing was heavier than the fear. So I reached out. Not with some dramatic reveal. Not with anger. Just a message. Simple. Direct. Honest. I think we may be related. If you're open to talking, I'd like to meet. I didn't expect them to reply quickly. But they did. And they said yes. The day I went to see them, I felt like I was stepping into a chapter of a book I never knew I was part of. The place we agreed to meet was quiet, a small cafe tucked behind a row of shops. I sat by the window, tapping my foot without even realizing it. When the door opened and they walked in, time slowed again. They looked nervous too. Their voice was soft when they said hello. They didn't sit down right away like they were still deciding if this was real. I introduced myself. They did the same. And then there was silence. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Like we were both trying to figure out where to begin. They didn't know about me, not until recently. Not until my biological parents had mentioned something during a conversation they apparently weren't supposed to overhear. They said they had asked questions. They said the answers didn't make sense. I listened quietly, holding on to every word. And then they said something that made my stomach twist. They seemed scared when I asked about you. Scared. Not guilty. Not sad. Scared. It didn't fit. None of it did. If they had moved on, if they had built a new life, why would my name bring fear into the room? What were they hiding? What were they afraid of being revealed? My sibling leaned closer and lowered their voice. There are things they don't talk about. Things from before I was born. Times they say they don't remember. But it always feels like they're hiding something big. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to even breathe for a moment. We talked for over an hour, slowly, carefully. Not like strangers trying to force a bond, but like two people trying to piece together a story someone else wrote for us. They didn't defend our parents. They didn't blame them either. They just seemed confused, caught in the middle of a story they had never been told the full version of. Before we parted, they said something that stayed with me. Maybe they came back because they're afraid of something. Not because they want something. That idea echoed in my mind for days. Meanwhile, the court situation grew more serious. Deadlines, filings, responses, everything felt like a ticking clock. My lawyer did what he could, but there was only so much we could do without more information. And now, I had a feeling the key to everything wasn't in the legal documents. It was in the past. The part no one wanted to talk about. So I started looking again. This time deeper. Not at their recent lives but their lives from before I was born. I searched old records, past addresses, people who knew them once and then didn't anymore. Every new detail felt like a thread connecting to something larger, something hidden behind the life they presented to the world. There were stories of arguments, financial trouble, relationships strained, a pattern of running when things got hard. But there was also mention of something else. Something that came up more than once but always indirectly. An event no one explained fully. Something that changed everything for them. And somehow I was at the center of it. I started to feel like I was walking toward a truth I was not prepared to handle. A truth that could break everything open. The tension grew heavier. Sleep came less often. Even food tasted dull. It felt like my whole life, everything I built, everything I survived was about to collide with the past I thought I had escaped. The storm wasn't near anymore. It was here. And I could feel the moment approaching, the one where everything would be revealed. But I also knew something else. Once the truth came out, there would be no going back. The days after meeting my sibling felt different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just different, like I was walking with a shadow I could finally see. I kept replaying their words in my mind, especially the part about our parents being scared. I didn't understand it, but I felt it. Fear wasn't something you could fake. Fear lived in the pauses between sentences, in the forced smiles and photos, in the way history gets rewritten with missing pieces. The case was moving forward. Court dates were being discussed. Lawyers talked in circles and paperwork piled up like bricks building a wall around me. But there was something no one could explain. Not my lawyer, not the documents, not anyone. Why now? Why, after 2 decades of silence, after leaving me to grow up in a system full of strangers, were they trying to force a legal tie again? Every answer I found only led to more questions. Then came the second twist, one I didn't see coming. It started with a phone call. Not from my parents. Not from their lawyer. Not from my sibling. It was from someone who had worked in the foster placement process years ago. Someone who had seen my file recently because of the legal request and recognized my name. Their voice was careful. Measured. Like if they moved too fast, something fragile might break. They told me that in the years I was in foster care, there had been requests made about me, not from strangers but from people connected to my biological parents. Quiet requests. Informal ones. Ones that were never approved. Ones that never reached me. I didn't know how to respond. My mind went blank. Someone had been looking for me. Someone wanted me. But I never knew. The person on the phone hesitated before saying the next part, like they were deciding whether they had the right to say it at all. There was someone who tried to adopt you, and was stopped. Stopped. A simple word but heavy enough to change everything. My breath caught. My heart felt like it had skipped a beat and then tried to make up for it all at once. My hands shook even though I was sitting perfectly still. I asked who it was. They didn't say a name. But they gave a clue. A connection. A location. It was someone who knew my parents before everything fell apart. Someone who had been close to them. Someone who saw something happen. Something that made them want to take me away from that life entirely. Someone who my parents blocked legally. The ground felt like it shifted under me. If this person tried to adopt me, then my parents didn't just let go of me. They chose to keep me away from someone who wanted me. Someone who might have given me a home. A real home. Why would they do that? The answer felt bigger than abandonment. Bigger than neglect. Bigger than mistakes. This wasn't just about them being unprepared or irresponsible. This was about control. About something they didn't want getting out. Something they needed to keep buried. The foster worker told me they couldn't say more over the phone. But they could send me a scanned copy of an old internal note. Something that referenced the blocked adoption request. They said it might help me understand the situation better. They sounded sad when they said it, like they knew what that kind of truth could do to a person. When the email arrived, I stared at my screen for a long time before opening it. My hands were cold this time. Not from shock. From anticipation. The document was short. Simple. But one line felt like it was written in bold, even though it wasn't. Adoption request denied due to family objection citing personal conflict. Child placement remained pending. Family objection. Personal conflict. Words that didn't explain anything but suggested everything. I read that line again and again until the words blurred. Someone wanted to raise me. Someone tried. Someone was pushed out. And whoever that person was, they were still alive. My sibling didn't know about any of this. They had lived a different story. A softer one. A protected one. I didn't blame them. But now I understood something they didn't. Whatever my parents were afraid of, it was tied to me. To the past. to a truth no one had spoken yet. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to my apartment settle into its usual nighttime quiet. Except it didn't feel quiet. It felt like the air was holding its breath. The storm wasn't just close anymore. It was already here. And the person who tried to adopt me, the person who knew what happened back then, they might be the key to everything. But I also understood one more thing. If I searched for this person, really searched, it might uncover something that could break my biological parents' entire life apart. And maybe mine too. And yet, I knew I had to look. Because the real story hadn't been told yet. And the truth was no longer something I was afraid of. It was something I needed, whether I was ready or not. Finding the person who once tried to adopt me took weeks. It wasn't simple. Records were old. Names were incomplete. People had moved, changed numbers, changed lives. But eventually, a trail led me to a small town 2 hours away. I stood outside a quiet house with faded paint and a small garden in the front. My heart was racing, but I knocked anyway. The door opened slowly and an older woman looked at me. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes were tired but warm. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was searching my face for something. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "You look just like you did back then." I didn't know what to say. We stood there for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Then she stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like lavender. Soft music played somewhere in the background. Everything felt gentle, the opposite of the tension I had been carrying for months. We sat at her kitchen table and she took a breath like she had been holding it for years. And then she told me the truth. She had been close to my parents long before I was born, practically family. She was there when I came into the world. She saw things she didn't go into detail about, but enough to know they were struggling in ways they couldn't control. She tried to help them. She tried to help me. But the more she stepped in, the more my parents pushed her out. When I was taken into foster care, she immediately requested to adopt me. She wanted to give me stability, a safe home, a life where I didn't have to carry the weight of the chaos I was born into. She was ready. She had the paperwork. She had the room prepared. She even had a crib waiting. But my parents refused. She paused, looking down at her hands. They were shaking. They said if anyone was going to raise you, it would be them. But they never did come back. And by the time the system asked if they still objected, they had disappeared. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I tried." I felt something rise in my chest, grief but also a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I knew I hadn't been unwanted by everyone. Someone did fight for me. Someone did care. But now the truth about the court case finally made sense. My biological parents weren't taking me to court because they wanted something from me. They were trying to prevent something from being revealed. That personal conflict in the documents was about them keeping me away from someone who would have exposed the instability, the chaos, the mistakes they didn't want the world to know. They didn't want their past to come back now, especially not in front of my sibling who they worked hard to protect from the truth. They weren't afraid of losing something physical. They were afraid of losing the image of who they had become. So I made my decision. In court, I didn't fight them by attacking their character or their past. I didn't argue about who was right or wrong 20 years ago. I simply told the truth. Clear, steady, calm. I told the court I did not want a legal connection to people who had not been part of my life. I told them I was willing to release any claims and ties, financial or otherwise. I didn't want anything from them. I just wanted to be free. And the judge listened. The ruling went in my favor. The legal case closed. The cords tying me to my biological parents, past and present, were finally cut. As we left the courthouse, my sibling waited for me outside. They didn't say anything at first. They just hugged me. A real hug. Not soft. Not hesitant. Real. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Not confusion. Just relief. It felt like I could finally breathe again. My parents didn't speak to me after that. And I didn't go after them. Some stories don't need a reunion to close. Some endings are quiet. But here's the twist I didn't see coming. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaking, uneven. It was from the woman who once tried to adopt me. She had found something while cleaning her attic. Something she thought I should have. Inside the envelope was a small photograph. It was me. As a toddler. In her arms. Smiling. A real smile. Not forced. Not confused. Not scared. Happy. On the back, she had written just one sentence. "I always believed you would find your way." I sat there for a long time holding that picture, realizing something important. The The story wasn't really about my parents returning. It was about me choosing what part of my past I would carry forward, and what I was finally ready to let go. For a few days after everything ended in court, life felt unusually quiet. Not the lonely kind of quiet I used to know, but the kind that comes after a long storm finally breaks. I didn't wake up with that heaviness in my chest anymore. I didn't keep my phone by my pillow, waiting for another letter or another call that could shake my world. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was allowed to just exist. To breathe. To be myself. But healing isn't a moment. It's not something that happens just because a judge signs a paper or because a truth finally comes to the surface. Healing is slow. Healing is choosing, every day, not to go back into the same pain you survived. I knew that now. I kept in touch with my sibling. We didn't talk every day. We didn't try to force a bond or pretend we grew up together. But we both made the effort to show up. We met for coffee sometimes. We shared small things about our days. They told me about their school plans, their favorite music, the dreams they were working toward. I told them about my job, the kinds of things I liked to cook, the small joys I was learning to allow myself. And slowly, something real started forming between us. It wasn't the kind of family connection I used to imagine as a kid. It wasn't about trying to recreate what was lost. It was about building something new from where we stood now, honest, steady, and not rushed. They were the first person I didn't have to explain my entire past to. They already knew the shadows, even if they didn't fully understand them. And I didn't have to pretend around them. That alone felt like a quiet kind of safety I had never known. As for my biological parents, they faded back into their own world. They didn't call, didn't write, didn't appear again. I didn't expect them to. I didn't need them to. I don't know if they felt relief or disappointment or shame or nothing at all. Maybe they were just trying to protect the version of themselves they built after I was gone. Maybe they were never ready for the responsibility of a child, not then and not now. And maybe that's a truth I had to accept without trying to understand further. There was a part of me that used to want answers. I wanted to know why I wasn't enough. Why they couldn't fight for me when I needed them most. But now that I was older, I realized some questions don't need answers to be healed. Some questions only keep us trapped in the past. And the past had taken enough of my life already. Instead, I focused on the present. I went back to therapy not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand the parts of myself that had been shaped by years of feeling unwanted. I learned how I had taught myself to avoid closeness. How I learned to survive by expecting to be left. How fear had kept me from trusting even the good things. And I learned I didn't have to live like that anymore. I didn't have to guard myself like I was still that child with a garbage bag of clothes waiting for the next house. I bought a new plant for my apartment. It sounds small, but it mattered. Plants require care, consistency, patience. They don't survive if you disappear. Keeping something alive meant I had finally reached a point where I believed I would still be here tomorrow. It was the first thing I allowed myself to nurture. I kept the photograph the woman gave me on my desk. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that love existed for me once, even when I didn't know it. That there were people who tried. That my story didn't start and end with abandonment. There was more to me. There always had been. One afternoon I met with her again. We sat on her porch, the light warm and soft. She asked if I was angry. I thought about it for a long moment. There was a time when anger felt like my only anchor. But now things were different. I used to be, I told her. But I think I was more hurt than angry. I think I stayed hurt for a long time because I didn't know there were other ways to feel. But I don't want to carry that anymore. She nodded like she understood exactly. And I think she did. She told me she never stopped thinking about me. She wondered all the time who I was growing into, whether I was safe, whether I was happy. She apologized again even though she didn't have to. She had tried. And sometimes trying is all a person can do. As the weeks passed, I began to write about my experiences. Not to expose anyone or to relive trauma, but to make sense of my own journey. The words didn't come all at once. Some days I wrote one sentence. Other days I wrote pages. I wrote about the foster homes, the loneliness, the strength I didn't know I had, the people who made small differences without realizing it. I wrote about loss. But I also wrote about growth. And rebuilding. And resilience. One morning, I woke up and realized I didn't feel like the abandoned kid anymore. I didn't feel like the person who had to fight tooth and nail for every bit of belonging. I felt like someone who survived something heavy and still found softness inside themselves. Someone who learned how to create family, even when the first one fell apart. The funny thing about healing is that it rarely looks dramatic. It shows up in the quiet moments. When you wash dishes without crying. When you sleep through the night. When you let someone hug you without flinching. When you look in the mirror and see someone whole, not someone broken. I realized that being abandoned didn't define me. Being alone didn't define me. What defined me was the way I kept going. The way I refused to become hard. The way I still believed in love even when I had to learn it myself. And in the end, I didn't just walk away from my past. I walked toward myself. The version of me I always hoped I could become. The version that finally felt enough.